first. And at first for me, I thought, wow, why would we want to go to a lottery where you give up so much control in that final selection? But what had happened was any state that had tried to use a competitive scoring mechanism was challenged in court, keeping in mind again that there are nationwide interests to apply for these licenses in every state.
Hello and welcome to another episode of PodCounty. I'm your host, Matt Meyer, here with our producer, Kyle Grantham.
Hey, how we doing?
In this episode of PodCounty, honestly, I think one of the best, we're talking about weed. That's right. We're talking with Rob Coupe, the head of the Delaware Office of the Marijuana Commissioner, about legalization here in Delaware.
The Commissioner of the Office of the Marijuana Commissioner might be the most unique title I've ever seen for a state official. This was a really, really educational episode. I learned a lot. I think, like a lot of people, marijuana legalization has been popular here for a long time. When I heard it passed, I wanted to know, okay, well, when is it going to get set up and why would it take a year? But you guys went through a lot of the complication that there is to just bringing this in the right way, and especially the social equity part of it, making sure that that not only gets implemented, but gets implemented and actually affects people that you want it to.
Absolutely. I mean, like a lot of things, the policy gets a lot of attention when it goes through the legislative process, but the details is what ultimately really matters. It's a much more in-depth process, and I think most people realize, and it was honestly enlightening for me to hear about all the work going into this and the challenges, not just in setting up a market, but ensuring that social equity and, some historical inequities are being addressed through setting up a legal market here in Delaware. So if you want to learn more about marijuana legalization, how the state is actually making progress towards legal marijuana, if you have input, sit down, enjoy this episode of PodCounty. Hello, Newcastle County. I'm Matt Meyer, County Executive, here to host today's episode of PodCounty, the podcast in the first county in the first state. I'm here along with producer, director, sound guy, visual guy, Kyle Grantham. We have a special guest today, the first ever weed czar for the state of Delaware, the head of the Delaware Office of the Marijuana Commissioner, Rob Coupe. Colonel Coupe Secretary Coupe has a long and storied career in Delaware of public service. 28 years with the state police, including over 3 years as colonel of the state police, 4 years as the head of corrections, 3 years as a cabinet secretary and secretary of Homeland Security, making sure we're all safe across our state in a variety of ways, and then served in various chief of staff roles, including with the Attorney General. And last year, Governor Carney named him the first ever weed czar. Welcome, Commissioner Coupe.
Thank you. Good morning. It's great to be here today.
So why would you do this? You're known as somebody who is bold and innovative, a leader in law enforcement. Taking on something like weed, it's quite a task. This point in your career, you've done, I don't want to say you've done everything there is to do, but you have an incredibly accomplished record. Why do this?
Thank you. It was very simple. The governor asked me to. So one of the things that it's entrenched in me from being a trooper is when the boss asks you to do something, you do your best to fulfill that mission. And that's carried over in my life of public service. So when the governor called me, he was very sincere and said, I need you to do this. And that's pretty much all it took. But you're right, it's very different from the career path that I had. But life is very different now from when I started with the state police in February of 1985. Life has changed, I've changed, and I've always tried to, be progressive in the sense that, adapt, keep up with the times, consider myself a lifelong learner. And so I've been, paying attention to marijuana. I try to read a lot, listen a lot, and I was following the medical developments, so I saw the value in it. And then just as a society, the impact it was having by being illegal, by being prohibited. And when the governor asked me to do this, as I said, I accepted the mission, and I set right in to learn about the industry, learn about the business, and how can I best implement this, the law that they gave me, the Marijuana Control Act. Didn't have any part in writing it, but I have total responsibility to implement it.
That can be a task. I guess a lot of people in government know you have no role in making the policy, but now it's your job to implement it. Let's get right into the details. I think there are a lot of people who marijuana legalization was signed into law last year, and they thought, the next day they could go to CVS, they could go to the store, buy edibles, buy something to smoke up. How are things going? What's the path? When can we expect to see stores?
Sure. So I'll start with the two bookends because you hit on two really good points. Number one, the state legalized it to possess, personal quantity up to 1 ounce of smokable flower, or, to possess it, it's legal. What we did not do is provide a legal way to purchase marijuana in our state unless you're in our medical marijuana program. That program currently has less than 17,000 participants, patients, and that number has declined since the legalization, most likely because they're waiting to see what happens with my office, or they're going to other states. They may be going to Maryland, they may be going to New Jersey, where it's already legalized for adult use. So they can go over there, anyone can go over there and purchase. Technically, you can't transport it back to Delaware legally because it's still illegal federally. Mm-hmm. The other bookend you set up was, when can we expect it to be for sale in Delaware legally at the regulated market in our retail establishments? Probably this time next year. Our target date is March of 2025. And like those folks that thought, oh, it's legalized and, Coupe's just been named commissioner, I guess we'll be selling, regulated legal marijuana in a couple months. Quickly, I found out that was not going to be possible. Establishing the office, when I first started, my first 40 days, it was only me and a laptop and a conference room until I was able to build the small team I'm authorized to have, which is 5 positions. Mm-hmm. So my office is very small, but we work with a lot of partners in state government, and that's what we're doing. So the first major task that we're assigned to do is establish the rules and regulations, which will regulate, govern this industry. We are starting to wrap those up. We had them posted at our website since February 14th. We were working on that. We just took them down Friday. And then they will go into the formal state regulation development process. So they'll be posted May 1st at the Register of Regulations, where they'll be up for 30 days for official comment. They come down, we review the comments, see if we want to make any changes, and then they're posted again. So that process, if everything stays on track, should wrap up July 11th, and that allows us to go into the next phase, that is licensing.
So you wrote the initial draft of the regulation.
So we're writing them in partnership with, we brought in a consultant agency who has helped numerous states. On my staff, my deputy commissioner his name is Paul Highland. Paul was the first director of Delaware's medical marijuana program. Mm-hmm. So he's been involved in the industry since 2011, brought a wealth of knowledge, institutional knowledge, had worked on their regs. So he brought that knowledge. And then we also have a deputy attorney general assigned to our team, Adria Martinelli, and she works on those as well. So it's a team effort.
The regulations are based on the regulation of alcohol in Delaware, or are you using other states' marijuana laws as the model?
So we're focusing more on other states' marijuana laws, our own medical marijuana regulations. There are a few things that mirror what happens in the Alcohol Beverage Control Commissioner's office, and that's related to the hearing process, some of the enforcement language and things like that. But almost everything else is more specific to the marijuana industry.
I think it's in the legislation how the licenses will be allocated.
That is correct.
Right?
Yes, there's 125 licenses. 47 of those will be social equity licenses, and we can talk about that. But those licenses break out. The first target date for issuance of license is November 1st, 2024, and that is cultivation. So that is, the growing. So there's 60 licenses there, and they're broken out into a couple categories, what we call open licenses, which are open essentially nationwide. Anyone can apply for an open license to be competitive. Then we have a social equity license in cultivation, and that's in 2 categories, essentially a small grow and a large grow. And then we have a micro business cultivation, which again is focused on a smaller cultivation size. Then we'll move to our manufacturing licenses.
So wait,
Yeah,
so that
go ahead,
means
I'm sorry.
there are only 60 companies, individuals who will be able to grow legally in Delaware.
That is correct. And added to that, though, we are working on a separate process for the existing medical marijuana licensees. That's called a conversion license process. Other states, like New Jersey, Maryland, they did that, I'll say, right out of the gate. So in their legislation that built the industry, they put right in there how to convert the medical marijuana. Delaware did a little different. When they created the Office of the Marijuana Commissioner, the Marijuana Control Act, they left medical marijuana intact and separate. So what we're working on is also the legislation to bring them over to my office so that medical marijuana will merge with us, we'll have responsibility for it, but it'll make us a lot more agile, a lot more flexible in setting up our retail sites and things like that.
So 60 cultivation licenses, if 100 groups apply, how do you choose?
Exactly. So that's a big challenge. You mentioned earlier, did we look at other states? Yes, we did. So looking at the other states, the way they handled this was they've gone to a lottery system, which at first for me, I thought, wow, why would we want to go to a lottery where you give up so much control on that final selection? But what had happened was any state that had tried to use a competitive scoring mechanism was challenged in court, keeping in mind again that there are nationwide interests to apply for these licenses in every state. Since the federal government won't allow the interstate movement of marijuana, it's still federally illegal. What we're seeing is a lot of large companies, oftentimes referred to as multi-state operators. They will literally try to get a footprint in as many states as they can so that they start to develop their own network. So being aware of that competition, being aware of those lawsuits, the states of Maryland, states of New Jersey, Connecticut, Nevada, Arizona, everyone has gone to this step where you incorporate a lottery in. So that is in the technical fix bill, the cleanup legislation.
Basically, legally, we just about have to do it.
Yes, so we
If
have to
not,
do
we'll
it that way.
right.
So what we will do is we will have a initial application period where you apply. You'll pay the application fee, which basic fee is $5,000. Unless you're a social equity applicant, it's $1,000. Micro business is $3,000. So you make that initial payment and you make your initial submission in the application process, which will be minimum qualifications that you have to make. And one of the benefits there that we did like about this part of the process is that to make that initial application, you don't have to have your building in place. You don't have to have all your finances already in place. You don't have to have county permits. You don't have to have a town zoning permit. You just basically have to have the vision, meet the basic requirements, and submit that application fee. Anyone and everyone that goes through that process and comes out where they've met the minimum qualifications, they've paid for that application, they will go into the lottery process. In the lottery process, it'll be broken out by categories. So as we said, there's different categories of licenses: cultivation, manufacturing, retail, and testing labs. So that becomes the categories. Then we'll break it out by county, because each county, we want to make sure that we're dispersing these businesses fairly and also to serve, the community that's interested. And then they're broken out by the type of license. So if it's an open competitive license or a social equity. So we will have several different breakouts of the lottery. After the lottery, we'll have 125 winners, we'll call them. They will become selected applicants. They'll be notified. And then they will start the next part of the application process, which is the conditional license. So they will submit now a much more detailed application where they're going to have to identify the location where they want to open their business, the financial backers they're going to be using. We'll be doing an in-depth background of them and also any of their business partners.
So each of those sounds very challenging to me.
Yes.
When you talk about where the location will be, that sounds simple enough, find a location. But I know, because we have the largest land use jurisdiction in the state here in this building in Newcastle County, we're grappling with that now. I know Sussex County has proposed legislation that would make it pretty hard to locate one of these things. My understanding of legislation is municipalities, towns and cities can choose whether they want to have these in their jurisdiction. So finding a location might be one of the hardest things.
It could be.
And then you get to financing, as you referenced. a lot of the financing, I don't know all the details, not to get in the weeds, so to speak.
Sure.
I don't know all the details, but financing these things under federal law, any money going cross-border, it might be illegal.
So you point out a lot of the very big challenges that this industry presents that a lot of folks are not aware of or maybe not prepared for. And that is why we do see from talking to other states and even our own medical program that the multi-state operators tend to do well in this process because they have the experience, they have the capital, and they also have the legal support to navigate what you described. Because you're right, when it comes to finances, they don't have access right now to traditional banking services. And that is because of the federal prohibition still against marijuana because it's a Schedule I drug. And because of that, most banks will not interact with the marijuana industry because of the federal insurance, the FDIC, that they're a part of. There's also very strict money laundering laws that they have to comply with. So it's not attractive for traditional banking, which means the individuals may have to borrow from non-traditional sources, investors. They're going to probably pay at a higher rate, things like that. It's essentially an all-cash business, which presents challenges. And also some folks are starting to embrace the idea that one of the best ways to target an illegal market is to have a well-established legal market. So if you don't want folks, buying it on the street or buying it from the person down the street that's been supplying them, if you want them to come to the regulated market, convenience is part of it.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons, I go out and talk to a town or a county if they ask me, to ask them, it's your decision, it's your citizens, but to make sure that they're making an informed decision. So yes, full circle, there are going to be challenges as far as them finding locations. Although right now we do have 13 retail establishments in our medical marijuana system, and they're spread throughout the state. And a lot of towns, counties have allowed that to happen, and there haven't been any issues. So hopefully they'll look at that also and consider that maybe there are places this industry can operate, using the zoning and planning that's good business for any county.
Social equity, you mentioned it a couple of times. A lot of people, including quite frankly myself, who advocated for the legalization of marijuana in Delaware, recognize that really for generations, we've gotten marijuana all wrong. We've been arresting, incarcerating people who either had a drug problem or a problem of poverty, disproportionately black and brown people. And so there was a strong feeling in the state legislature, and I think among advocates, that we should use this law and this change in policy as a way of attempting to address some of those historic wrongs. You've mentioned social equity a few times. What does it mean in terms of what the commissioner's office is doing?
Yes, great point, and it is in the code. And we did have to make one change to it. I just wanted to share because it was interesting that the more I learn about the industry. And that is our social equity law that was in the code was similar to other states. And the first line in it said that to qualify, you had to be a Delaware resident. And you have to be the 51% owner of the company. And then it went through specific criteria. And what we found out was that simple mandate to say that you had to be a Delaware resident, because it ties in with everything you just said, was being challenged nationally under a federal clause known as the Dormant Commerce Clause. So in the Constitution about interstate commerce, the Commerce Clause has developed this Dormant Commerce Clause. And what it does is it prevents states from creating a law that would limit interstate commerce. So the law, that line has been challenged in a couple states in that topic, Maryland, Maine, and some others, and the courts have come back, the federal courts have come back with different decisions, some saying since marijuana is illegal federally, it doesn't apply, and then another said it doesn't matter, it could still apply. So what we've done is we've taken out that line, but we've been more directed, more focused. So our criteria, the first criteria is that you as an individual to qualify for a social equity license were convicted of a marijuana Delaware offense prior to April 27th of 2023 when the law passed for HB1 legalizing it. So that is the first way in. So we've taken out that you have to be a Delaware resident, but you have to have been harmed by the Delaware
Delaware law.
prohibition, which is what you laid out, right? The second way would be that you resided in a disproportionately impacted area, as you described. One, as in the code, they kind of defined it for us to focus on marijuana arrests, conviction, confinement related to that. So we are working with Delgis. They pulled anonymized data for us on marijuana arrests for the last 10 years. And then we're working with the Department of Technology and Information, who are making an interactive map for us using census tracts. That was the areas we were told to focus on. So we hope to have that, at least see a draft of it within a week. And once we have that operational, we'll be able to announce in a little more detail our social equity program, because we're going to be setting up workshops in June and things like that. But folks need to see that map to find out if they can qualify that way. And then there's a third way, and that is if you have essentially a parent, a child, or a sibling that was convicted of a Delaware marijuana offense, just like the first criteria. So one of those three is how you would qualify as a social equity applicant.
And so what benefit does that? So there are certain licenses. We're not talking about users here. We're talking about owners. We're trying to create financial benefit for people who are disproportionately impacted. Is that the general idea?
And opportunity, yes. So, one of the ways I often explain it to folks is that, especially folks that tell me, they don't agree with the social equity approach. They don't think it's right. They look at it as, oh, you're rewarding someone that broke the law.
Right.
And what I try to ask them to consider is that while these folks, yes, were selling marijuana products illegally against prohibition, there was a lot of folks that were coming into their neighborhoods or into their community or into their cities or towns and purchasing it and going back out, whether it was to the suburbs or rural areas, with little or no attention, and have done that for years. The illegal market is pretty strong in this in marijuana. So now that it's legalized, it seems unfair that the folks that were meeting the demand, because that's what it was, a demand, now would have no opportunity to compete in this market. So the idea is that, let's give them a second chance. So let's give them a chance to, come over to the legal market and adapt, pay taxes, establish, a business, and contribute to the community on all levels. And it'll be challenging for some folks, because if they are in the illegal market, which right now is continuing because we don't have the competition yet until we're up and running, but if they are, they're not dealing with taxes, they're not dealing with unemployment insurance, they're not dealing with all those kinds of overhead items. But
usually don't have a legal expense line,
exactly,
right, when you're selling on the corner.
Yes. Yeah. So the idea is that, it's good for the community because they get an opportunity to do things, the right way. And it's also good for the community because, they won't be on the street. Their products won't be on the street. The products that the regulated market has responsibility for are tested. So the idea is that it's a harm reduction. So we are, there's no pesticides. This is an all organic process. We also test for certain heavy metals and substances. There are some substances that are used in the production of marijuana products, and sometimes they can be dangerous. So in the regulated market, that's exactly what we're going to do. We regulate it, make sure you don't use that. It all gets tested before it goes to sale. Person makes a purchase, they know what they're buying. They can see what's in the bag by the labeling. The bag will be tamper-proof, showing that no one's been into the product since it was tested, and also child-resistant. So there are a lot of controls that the regulated market brings that the illegal market doesn't. So that's the idea is, if we can get these folks from the illegal market to come into the regulated market, it'll be good for them and it's good for the, for the state and the communities.
We're not the first to legalize this. We're not the first in the country to be doing this. Which has an advantage in that, there are a lot of regulatory regimes out there. You can look at a menu of options. Different states approach this in different ways. Is there a state you look at or a community you look at and say, they did this right and we want to do something close to what they did?
Yes, and that's the state of Maryland has been really helpful. They've been helpful as mentors and also just given us the opportunity to see what they're doing. And it's great because they're about a year ahead of us. So the timeliness is really good. As you mentioned, There's currently 24 states where marijuana has been legalized for adult use, recreational use. There, and plus the District of Columbia, D.C. And then there's about 17 states where medical marijuana has been legalized. So there are a lot of states that are in this business. There are a lot of states that have faced challenges. There are a lot of states that continue to face challenges, even some of the ones that have been in the industry for a long time. And so we've been able to read, learn. There is a national organization of regulators. It's called the Cannabis Regulators Association, CANRA.
Have you been to the meetings?
I've been to one.
What are do they like Saturday night? Do they go to parties, and what do they do at
No,
parties?
it's not it's not that kind of fun social
Gotcha.
atmosphere. It was kind of it was all business. The days were filled with different presentations, breakout groups, and things like that. But it was really good because what I got to see was the states that have been doing this for a long time. They're still working to try to get it perfect, so to speak. You know, they're tweaking their regs. Some of the larger states, you know, even California and New York, were talking about trying to stand up their social equity programs or trying to continue their programs and the challenges they're facing. So it was really good. Another area that a lot of states were talking about is advertising, because we place a lot of limitations, a lot of restrictions on advertising to avoid influencing children. And the industry wants to be competitive, not just in the market, but they want to be competitive with each other. So some of them, in some of the states, we're hearing about them pushing the limits on advertising, you know, to where the regulators have to step in. So that's very interesting to, you know, hear about that. That's where we did talk about the lottery. You know, different states talked about that. So yeah, it's very beneficial. But Maryland is probably the state, you know, we turn to the most. We also visit New Jersey. They're great partners as well in opening their doors, sharing with us what they're doing. Their rollout is a little different because of the size as well. But Maryland has given us a lot of opportunities to learn.
Let's talk money for a minute.
Sure.
One compelling reason to do this was potential revenue to the state, taking something that to people in the finance office is a great expense, additional policing costs. You were at the AG's office, the cost of prosecuting these crimes, hopefully reducing or eliminating that cost, and having some revenue, tax revenue coming in, fee revenue come into the state. Any projections, any idea on what kind of revenue this is going to raise?
Sure. Yes, we worked up some very basic projections for the Joint Finance Committee when we appeared there with Cabinet Secretary McQueen. And some of the early numbers that we're predicting, so as I mentioned, there's 125 licenses. If we only had 2 applicants for each license, so if we only had 250 applicants, which we think is low, that would generate over $750,000 just in that first application process. And then the licensing process, we know there'll be 125 licenses awarded. That also generates about $750,000. And then from there, we look at the conversion license process, which is the current 6 licensed marijuana providers in our state that are under the medical marijuana program. Depending on how those licenses are awarded and what fees are charged, the General Assembly is still considering that, but that could generate between $1 million or over $5 million, depending on the fees that are assessed to that. And then when we look at what would be the annual revenue generated, so what we look at is we look at the current medical marijuana program, and in that program, when we looked at the numbers near the end of last year, it was close to 17,000 patients. And they spent, overall, the sales were just over $53 million. And that's not profit, that's just total sales. But looking at that, one of the things, I'll just point this out as well, if you're in the medical program, every time you come in for your purchase, you have to produce your medical card because you're limited in how much you can purchase when you come in. You can only purchase up to 3 ounces every 2 weeks. And then by law, you can possess up to 6 ounces on your person or at home as a medical patient. But you give up your anonymity with that card. So when you come in and make your purchase, even though it's protected information as a patient, it's still captured. So all of your sales, what products you bought. And that data gives us an opportunity to look at what could we predict to be the sales of the individual. So that's about $3,303 a year. That's how it broke out for medical. So if we take that number, $3,303 per year, and we expand the population of users from 17,000 to 85,000, which is, again, a low estimate. for what we'll probably see in the recreational market. That generates about $281 million in sales. 15% sales tax. So Delaware, for the first time in its history, is now going to have a sales tax on marijuana products. That in itself would generate about $42 million. So that $42 million covers the operation of the state agencies involved, which is a total of 34 positions, even though only five are at the Office of the Marijuana Commissioner. But to cover those positions and all the other operating costs, that's about just under $5 million. And then of that $42 million, each month, as those taxes are coming in, each month 7% fund the Justice Reinvestment Fund, which will be overseen by the Criminal Justice Council. So that those monies will be taken out. But any monies that are left, the General Assembly, as the law is currently written, will determine how those monies will be spent.
It goes to the general fund, basically.
It'll be up to them.
Up to them.
Yes,
Gotcha.
sir.
Good. Do you think this is going to work?
I think it is. It's going to be challenging as the closer we get to these deadlines. You know, the challenges are real. The other thing to consider is when, for us, is, you know, when will we go live? We have the medical marijuana industry, which once they get through the conversion license process, they could sell to both, right? They could sell to medical patients, they could sell to recreational. But we have a couple concerns about when to allow them to do that. One is that we want to ensure that medical marijuana patients continue to get access to what they've signed up for, what they deserve.
And are their purchases taxed?
They are not. They are not. So
and they will continue to not be taxed?
That is correct.
Okay.
Under the current model. Yes, sir. And under HB 285, there's actually some other changes that are happening to medical marijuana, kind of easing up some of the structure. So when will we be ready to open? The challenges we face, will it be successful? What we're trying to make sure is that when we go live, so to speak, right, when someone can walk into a retail marijuana store and make a legal purchase for adult use recreational marijuana, is that we will have sufficient number of stores, sufficient amount of product to satisfy the market, you know, statewide. We've seen some other states that open up, we'll say piecemeal. So they open up a couple, but not enough, and it creates a lot of issues because then you have the really long lines, and then they sell out of product, and now people are unhappy, and the medical marijuana folks aren't getting what they need. So the way we're operating today, medical marijuana, those patients are still getting what they need. And if we asked our medical marijuana providers to, you know, simply open and serve both populations, even if they doubled production, which from meeting with them, I'm confident they could. You know, that gets us to 40,000. If we're expecting over 85,000, it makes sense that we should try to have, you know, more prepared, more retailers prepared, more cultivation ongoing, more manufacturing to meet the demand. And the other part is fairness. One of the reasons I was told that medical marijuana was not included in the initial law was that they wanted to, you know, talking about like the social equity program, what sense would it make to have these new licenses if you're going to let the medical marijuana industry just grow and basically, you know, take over the market? No one else will be able to get a start. Was how it was shared with me. So by doing it the way it's evolving, we can delay the start of the medical marijuana transition until we have other retailers ready to go. So the challenge we have is that once we issue these conditional licenses in the fall, so starting, you know, after November, how fast can these new startups get started?
Yeah.
As you pointed out, you know, going back to the beginning of our conversation, the challenges with zoning and those kind of things, finances. So again, what we'll likely see is, you know, some of the multi-state folks that come in, they'll be prepared. They have a team, they have a system. What may be more challenging is some of our social equity candidates, is ensuring that they get an opportunity to be, you know, at the start of this market. So trying to balance all those interests and the interest of the state, and again, getting back to the principle of why I was told this was legalized, was to impact the illegal market. Because right now we're not impacting the legal market.
Right.
We kind of strengthened it, right?
Right.
Because now they can sell and people can buy. What they're doing is against the law, but once the person has it in their possession,
Right.
they're within the law.
Right, the disincentive to buy is kind of gone.
Is gone,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So, we still need to push on the timing to try to be as rapidly setting this up as we can, but at the same time ensuring that we're focused on the fairness and that when we open, we really can meet the demands of the market.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Rob Coupe. 40-plus years of service in all sorts of capacities for Delawareans, and he probably has his biggest task now in front of him, taking a product that for generations has been illegal and making a sane, legal, safe market that not only generates revenue for the state, but also addresses some historic inequities across our community. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here with you this morning.
Great. Thanks.